All right, we're back. It is COMP1004. That's Rapid Application Development here at Georgian College. It's the fall of 2016 semester. We're week 12, part 1 of our lovely broadcast. And what we're doing is, I'm talking about special topics in C# and Windows forms today. Remember, we're talking over the next couple weeks. I'm not going to teach the full time because I want to give you time in class to work on your projects and your assignments that you've got going on. To alleviate some of the pressure. I know that people have given you assignment after assignment, right? I don't want to be one of those guys. I've given you my assignments already. You got 5, that's enough. And I want to give you some time in class so I can work with you on some of the challenges you have and maybe even develop some interesting things. For also offer my services for the people that are going to choose to do the game assignment for the final project, final assignment. They want to do the Unity game. I want to talk about that and how to work with you to develop that stuff. So that way, you know, because I can't spend all the time teaching Unity because not everyone's interested, right? So I'll try and do some work with individuals. Okay, so today though, we're going to start by talking about, and I've got this lesson 12 that I put up on Blackboard there. It's called Additional Topics in C#. I can't go through this whole lesson. It's like, I don't know, 70 slides or something crazy like that, right? Or 63 slides. So what we're going to do is do some part of it today, and part of this stuff I'm going to be talking about next week, right? Because I want to talk about a few things and then move on to something else. Like we actually move on to sitting with you guys and talking with you guys about stuff, right? So at the break, when we break, that's it. There's not going to be any more teaching after that. Now, it doesn't mean that our class has to be cut short. I'm going to sit with you guys and work with you guys, if you're interested, on your assignment that's due tomorrow, right? As well as I want to know about your concept if you're doing the game, your slot machine game, for the final thing that you're submitting. Just a reminder that we will be having an exam in this course the last day of classes, right? So so not next week, but the week after, when we get together. And when we get together for the exam that we're going to be doing, just keep in mind that it's going to be practical and it's going to be based on the stuff that you already know, right? And the questions I always get when it comes to that kind of stuff is, will there be blah? What's going to be on it? Like I said before last week, if I get you to do any kind of database work, the database connection will be there. Okay, so nothing that you have to do. If I'm going to get you to do file manipulation, opening and closing and all that kind of stuff, I will give you I will start you off like in the right path. So I'll give you some starting code, and then you just have to complete it because there's not a lot of time, right? You may think that it's easy to do these kind of things, and you have lots of examples. If you've done assignment 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. By the time you get to your exam, or you've done 1, 2, 4, and you're working on 5, your exam should be fine. Okay, it's nothing that's going to be outside anything that I haven't talked about. I'm not going to try and surprise you and say, surprise, we're going to do this now, right? No, all right. Obviously, I'm not going to do that on the exam. I'm going to try and time the exam and do the exam myself so that it only lasts around an hour and a half. That's what I want to try and time it. So it's not a long exam, but giving other people who are a little bit slower the chance to kind of complete it. That's what I want to try and do. All right. Yeah.
Is there a way that you could maybe put up a previous year's exam so that we can practice?
Practice. I could. I'm not so sure that would help you though, because I think the best thing to do is take a look at the stuff you've already done, right? Because that's the assignments. All the assignments should prep you for the exam. So if I've given you an assignment, if the components in the assignment are good, there's a good chance some of those components will be on the exam, right? Open book, open assignment, all that stuff. All you have to do is assimilate. We will assimilate you. You'll assimilate all the components that I've already given you in some other project. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to just twist it that way, right? But it's not going to be something that's undoable. And I'm going to try and keep the number of tasks that you have to do in your exam down, right? Only because it becomes like a book, you know, to write these things. Okay, so we're going to be talking about that today. So really special topics. But again, 2 weeks from now, please be aware that the exam's happening. There will be a practical exam. There will not be any kind of true, false, multiple choice. So it's more like a lab exam, a lab test, more than anything else. And that's really what's happening. Any questions around the exam that's happening 2 weeks from now? All right. Okay. Additional topics. So these are some of the things we can talk about. I don't have to talk about every one of these things with you. One of the things I also want to include is a kind of a special topic each week for this week and next week on Unity, just to give you some, for people who are interested on that kind of stuff. And again, I'm not sure that it'll be something that I do only if there's only a couple people that are doing the game, and I got to kind of pull you guys to find out who's doing it, then I don't want to waste people's time, right? So we have to try and maximize the time that we have. Let's talk about the scroll bar control and why would we use such a thing. Okay, so sometimes I know we've talked about this, but I want to use something like a scroll bar in order for me to see more of my stuff. And usually, typically, and I'm gonna talk about this a little bit. We may do some of this inside of a project, a sample project, but sometimes we may make a form that requires a lot more information with a small size. Okay, typically we've gone away from this and from a design perspective these days because it's bad to scroll. We don't want to have your user scroll to find stuff. However, sometimes you have a limitation. There might be some times where you don't have an opportunity to change the size of your form or something. And therefore, the scroll, the horizontal and vertical scroll bars allow you to put other information in there that you need, in order for you to have kind of more information to your user. So I've included this stuff here so you understand what it does. So there's the H scroll bar and the V scroll bar, those two controls. And if I look at, let me open up a project to use for today. And I'm going to call it, of course, lesson 12. It'll just be special topics when it comes to this kind of stuff. All right, because we want to talk about them just that way it's talked about. Also, there's a section that talks about XML and how to load and work with XML in this PowerPoint. I'm also going to probably talk about JSON data at the same time because it's probably more popular nowadays in many ways than XML data. It's a better format. It kind of serves a different purpose than XML, although we still use XML for things like designing layouts, even with the new WPF forms or the Universal Windows platform. It uses a lot of XML-based layout, and if you do any kind of Android programming, like on your phones, they also use XML-based layout, right? So it's not dead, the markup language. It's just not as used from a data perspective as much as before. Okay, so we're going to kick off a new project here. It's going to be brand new, and we're going to call it, again, it's going to be a Windows project, a Windows Forms application, which we're going to put in the COMP1004 folder, and we're going to call this thing COMP1004 F2016 lesson 12. Very, very simple. And we'll do some of these things. I'm going to drag and drop some of these things in there and explain what's happening. One of the things that I've added in here is drag and drop controls. That's become much more popular from a Windows perspective, especially when it comes to touchscreen. You drag something from one place and you drop it into something else. This works great when it comes to, desktops. Not so much with mobile, all right? I don't see a lot of dragging and dropping with mobile. Why do you think that is? Why do we not use drag and drop controls typically with mobile? Anybody have an idea? What was that? Yeah. You can get in the way, but what else? What's the other reason? Get your screen dirty. Well, that's more practical. But actually, the real reason why you don't use touch controls in mobile is it's not the right user story, right? Why would we do a touch, like a drag and drop in mobile? Because drag and drop it's a gesture, right? That gesture means flip pages usually. It doesn't mean like take it from here and put it over there, typically. And so that gesture, because it's not really the common gesture, we're not giving the user what they expect in a mobile user story. When I say user story, it means that I've got my screen, my view screen is a little smaller, but why would I want to drag and drop from my left to the right or right to left? That kind of data we don't normally do. So it's not a great user story for mobile, but it works nicely with desktop, especially when you're transferring numbers or data, right, from one area to the other. It will work with mobile as well, but it's not recommended. So so some other areas we're going to be talking about over the next little while. All right, so we got our form, and like I said, it's a common control. So when we kind of scroll down and we want to find any kind of scroll bars or whatever, notice that there's toolbars, right? We have our tool strips, and we have our containers, right? So how do I add, and if I was going to find something, what's the quickest way to find something that you don't see here, if it exists? Thank you, right? Because if I start typing V, right, and if I type in scroll, right, notice that it comes up, vertical scroll bar and H scroll bar. Those two controls are the things that I want to add to my form, right? So if I add both in there, so if I add here's my vertical scroll bar, right? And I can expand this thing to make it grow, to make it kind of look like a form. And sometimes we need to do this because, again, it makes sense for what we're doing. And there's the horizontal scroll bar. So if I take a scroll, here's horizontal scroll bar. Again, for me, typically the user story does not include a scroll bar of any kind, because that means that it's an extra gesture that the user has to make in order for him to get to the data, him or her to get to the data, which means something's wrong with my design, typically, for scroll bars. But if you needed to, and for whatever reason, and we probably, just to do you justice, we should mention that it can be done. So let's say if I put a bunch of things in here, like I got this button, and I got some check boxes. I'm just randomly putting some stuff in here. Maybe some kind of combo box too, some information, maybe some other stuff in here that takes a little bit more space, Tom. And we'll see if I can get into the, some more common controls. Let's look at a monthly, maybe a list view. That might be good. So put that underneath here, and we'll kind of pull it outside the screen here like this. So it's in the view. We'll make the scroll bar appear on top by bringing it to front, right? So we got this other view in behind here. Just off the get-go, do you think this will work? Like if I just start, doing this kind of stuff? From a viewing and hiding perspective, it doesn't really do much, right? Just off the cuff. Like if I do one of these, it doesn't do anything. Yeah, I just put a thing in here. Drum. Which one? This one? The combo box? Or the list box? This one? Combo box. Combo box. So this is not a great user story. Here, what else would I use scroll bars for, right? Better user story, yeah. Yes, I could do that, but what's a really better idea to use scroll bars for? Much better. Dials. I want to have a range of data. That is a good user story for a scroll bar, even on mobile. An example of that would be something like this. I want to go from -10 to +10 from a brightness perspective, right? Good use of a scroll bar. Put the scroll bar in the middle, so it hits horizontal scroll bar we're talking about now. And same thing with a dial. If you want to dial up something, those are neat controls, right? To make sense. Hiding and storing data or showing in the screen, not a great user story. Not recommended. I'm showing you that it can, you can probably do something with this, but I don't recommend it. And it gives you some ideas about how to do that. Now, so it says it here. It says, often scroll bars are used to control sound level, color size, and other values that can be changed in small amounts, right? We can also move things and move things around. I wouldn't want to do that. So let's go back and take these off for a second, right? So I want to tend to remove these things. So yes, we could probably use scroll bars for that if I really want to. But let's suppose that we have some values. And what I want to do is I want to use instead of my vertical scroll bar, let's get rid of this. This horizontal scroll bar could be the value that I have for my color value. Let's say I want to go whatever the color value is. Let's say opacity. I want to move from 0 to 255, where 255 is purely opaque and 0 is fully transparent. Right? Kind of very simple user story there. So again, I want to get the label. Here's my label. And I'm not doing anything with these controls. And I'm going to put it in another text box. So here's my text box. Okay. And let's make everything the right size. So again, from a form perspective, remember what we did last week, which I highly recommend to avoid issues, is go all the way to the top of the form and make sure that your auto scale mode, instead of being font, is none. Right? So we don't want it to auto scale my form. And I want to change my whole form so that way the font for the form, right? The font for the form is what I want. I want to move it to, we'll just use Microsoft Sans today, this time, with a font size of about 16 for the form, right? So it kind of makes everything a little larger, right? So I didn't change that too much. That's not what I wanted, but that's okay, right? We'll keep that little event, right? Horizontal scroll bar 1. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and just delete it for a second and rename it. Because I have to rename my stuff. Hold on a sec. I'm going too fast. All right, so my label is going to be opacity. We can call it whatever you want, or transparency. They're kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other when it comes to that kind of stuff. It means different things, but it can actually have the same effect. So we'll call this opacity. Let's say we're affecting opacity. And this would be the value that I'm going to store. Now, if I'm going to store my opacity value, this is opacity label. I'm going to store my opacity value in a text box, right? Right? If I'm going to do that, there's two possibilities. One, I can type the value, right? Typically in a control like this. So from 0 to 255, let's say, I want to limit my values from 0 to 55. And the other one is I can dial up the value, right? Whatever that value is, right? So we've got an opacity. We've got the opacity text box. We have to rename this. So opacity text box. There we go. And then what I want to do in my opacity text box, right, is do a couple things. We're going to limit what it can do in a second. Here, for this horizontal scroll bar, we're going to call this, you know, kind of the opacity horizontal scroll bar. Let's call it scroll bar, so we know what it is. You know, it kind of breaks our conventions a little bit. Okay, so what can we do with this, right, that we can see here in our properties? That's the first thing you should ask yourself. By the way, from a form perspective, you know, going back to, you know, conventions, we should probably change the form name from form 1 to, let's say, our start form, or maybe our opacity form if we're just doing an opacity control in one form, right? So we can kind of rename the form to the opacity form. Make it easy to understand. Yes. That's one thing. And then we want to maybe just change the properties of the form itself so that it kind of matches what the form's function is. So for example, our form 1 would be called opacity form, or whatever else. You could say change opacity will be something that you want to do as well, right? And then we want to just like kind of format this bar a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of hide this one so we can see the properties, which is really more important. Let's take a look what it can do. Here's something we're going to see later on: allow drop. Allow drop in any control. We haven't touched about this at all. Allows us to drag and drop. Doesn't make sense for opacity, but we may come back to this when we handle drag and drop. Allow drop. Can I drop a value onto this bar? It doesn't make sense from what we're used to doing. Does the user expect us to be able to drag and drop a value onto a scroll bar? No. Okay, so that's one thing it doesn't do. Causes validation, we can leave that as true for now. We can also include a context menu strip, so when you hover over it, you can right-click onto it and do something. That might be useful if you wanted to format the bar to make it fatter or thinner or something. So we can do that with the context menu strip. We're not going to do that right now. Our default cursor is fine, but we could change it so that it looks like a hand, right? Because usually we want to kind of, when we hover over the opacity, I'm going to show you this. And again, just one more change to the form. A couple changes. One thing I want to change is our start position will be center. I recommend that. And our control box is true, but I don't want to allow the form border style. Here's a form border style to be resizable. I'm going to go to fixed single. And I want to take away the ability for me to maximize, because that usually doesn't, you know, bode well for some of the stuff we've been doing. So I'm going to put this at false. A couple of changes here. That typical changes we do all the time. So if I run this thing now, you know, you can see that when I hover over this thing, two things happen. The scroll bar, I can see that I'm hovering over. I'm getting a hover effect by default, right, on the scroll bar itself. See? But my cursor doesn't change. It stays as a pointer, right? You may want to change this to a hand or something else that indicates that you're going to do something, almost like a gesture, right? Now this, of course, if you're going to convert it to mobile, would be absolutely useless because there's no hover on mobile right now for most phones. Some phones have it actually, right? Especially with a curved screen. But for this one, it doesn't work. So that means from a cursor perspective, and we haven't really talked about that, I could change this to something else. And here are the defaults that it comes with. So the default is an arrow. By the way, this will help you with your slot machine project. If you want to turn your cursor to say no, like you can't bet, you can't spin the wheel, or you can't spin click the spin button unless you have money, right? You can do that with for your project if you want to change the cursor. So you want to have a hand, and this is the last one that's on here. So I can change it right here. So I can say that the cursor is a hand. You could also, as long as there's a property here, chances are you can do it with code. Change it so that the cursor type is a hand. Now if I run this thing, it makes more sense. So again, we're going to give feedback, right? So that when I hover over the bar, anywhere else I'm hovering is good, right? Oh, did I hover over the whole thing? Hold on a second. Mistake. I meant undo. Default. Default is the arrow. I meant for the scroll bar, the cursor is a hand, not for my whole form. Yeah, let's try that again. So, when I hover over the scroll bar, you can see that I'm getting feedback from not just from the hover perspective, but I can see that I can do something with that with the hand, like do one of these. That's what it means, right? All right, so that's why I would change it, from a design perspective to kind of indicate to the user, hey, I'm doing something with the hand, right? Okay, that's one. Yes, you can make your own custom cursors. We're not going to do that here. You can. There's a plugin. Yeah, there's stuff you can download to make it work. Okay, and you can also write your own custom code to make it work. Okay, so that's a couple things. Maximize minimal size and maximize size. That's the size of the actual object. Small change. That's something that I want you to think about. What does small change mean, right? So each individual change, right? Maximum is 100, right? That's what it is. Maximum is 100. And the minimum, right? So there's maximum and minimum. Minimum is 0. Maximum is 100. Now, if we're doing an opacity, the minimum would be 0, but the maximum will be 255. So we're going to change this maximum to 255. Then the small steps. So the small change might be 1, so 1 at a time. But there's also a larger step, right? The large change would be 10. So that means like 10 at a time. So now how do I get the large step? If I click in between the actual scroll bar itself and this side, right? I get a large change. An example would be if I did something like this. Click here. You can see these are large changes, but here, those are small changes. If I actually drag the actual scroll bar across. Okay? Large change, small change. Okay? Now, how to make this thing work so it's effective. One, we have to set a value that comes typically here in our in this box right here. We can do it by default. So inside of our text, I can assign a value by default as 0, right? So there it is. If I really want to, I can format this number so it's centered. So I can do something like align my text. So I can say text align is center for this one, so it's aligned to the center. Remember, I want to have both things work. So I want you guys to help me to do this, because otherwise this whole exercise that I'm doing with you will be actually useless, right? So what do I do when I move my scroll? When I scroll my wheel, I want this to change, this number to change. So if I scroll up, whatever the value is of this thing, again, based on 0 to 255. So if you notice that the maximum now is 255 and the minimum is 0. Whatever the value that I've dialed up there, I want it to appear in the window. Pretty simple, right? So how would you recommend it? What do you think? What do I do first? Double click, right? That's because the default behavior is going to be the event that's going to be generated. All right, so double click, which is going to be the scroll event. So when I scroll, I get a value. All right, so now the opacity scroll bar itself is going to have a value. So if I say opacity scroll bar, right, dot, and if I want to say the value, if I want to look at the value of my opacity scroll bar, right, that's the value, okay? And whatever the value is, I want to take this value and I want to set the opacity text box to the value, right? So I want to say something like this. I want to say then the opacity text box, right, dot text is equal to the opacity scroll bar dot value. But I can't do this because this is an integer that I'm converting to a string. I need to do something like toString, right, which will convert it to string. I'll take the value, whatever I get, and put it into the text box, right? Now again, I'm just going along with our regular properties that we've used before. I'm just introducing another control for you guys so that these are controls you may find useful. So again, if I dial this up, you can see that I can go up like this now, And if I dial it up, it'll go up by tens, like we've decided. Nice and easy. Very useful to limit our range. Now, here's the other thing. What if I change this part here to 100, right? It's not going to show 100 here. We have to do both sides. So if I change my value here by hand, it should display on my scroll bar here. Now, this is where it becomes really tricky, right? Because I'm asking for user input. Whenever I get user input, right, I can get anything. I can get like numbers, letters, I can get all kinds of crap, right? So, but here, whatever, let's assume for a second that the user is not going to enter a funky letter or other thing, right? Just numbers. Again, it'd be the same thing, right? Things we've seen before. So if I go to my opacity text box, and now I don't want to double click because I'm not clicking on it, right? I want to change. And if you look at the options that I have for different events, the default is by text changed event, right? So when I change my text, right, this is the one, I want to generate an event that allows me to do something. Yes. Go to the maximum value is the question. So, whoop, here, right? Yeah, what happens? How come it loops back to 245 or 246? Look, I can kind of click it so it goes to 246 from 0 to 4. How come? That's a good question, right? And what about when I go all the way down to 0? Does it go to 0? Oh, yeah. Well, look here. I'm going to 246, but it won't go beyond 246. It could be. We're going to talk about this in a second, but I want to talk about, first of all, before we fix that problem, that's another problem to fix. How do I type something like 100, and then it's going to show me what it is in the actual bar itself? How do I do that? So, of course, we're going to do something like this. We're going to double-click on this. It's going to generate the text change event, and then whatever the value is of my text, I'm going to convert it back to value and set the value to what I want. So something like this. I'm going to say the other way around. So my opacity scroll bar value then is equal to, we're going to set the value with a setter control to the opacity text box.text, but we're going to convert it. We're going to convert it with convert to int32. So we're going to convert it to integer. And we're going to convert the value, which is text normally, to int32. So whatever we put in there. Now, barring that someone doesn't put in some funky value, right? Like some other kind of thing. We're going to make a fix for that in a second. So save that and see what happens. So now I type 100, and then I see that it goes to 100, right? So that the value, the scroll bar reflects the position. If I backspace all the way, and then if I kind of click away, then I get an issue, right? So these are all things we have to control, right? How do I, fix that problem, right? Try catch would be the way to go. Yeah. What else? What other things? Try parse. Try parse is a good way of doing it too. Try parse is like a try catch and a convert all in one, right? Yeah. These are all extra stuff. So try catch is another structure. Try parse does kind of what the try catch does, but only in from one statement. So it's a much more efficient way of doing it. It's very good. So let's talk about try parse for a second. So if I was to try that instead, so instead of this convert, remember convert to int32. If I start typing try parse, just to start, my journey here. So if I type try parse, now try parse is like this, right? And if I hover over it, it says try parse are not currently in the user context, right? Is that the way you do it? Hold on, right? First control dot, right? And if it tries to find the thing, it'll say, I want to generate try parse for you. So that's not it. That's the correct thing though. So what's the command? Yeah. Correct. int32 is what we're converting to. Dot. Try parse is a built-in method, right? And then when we do one of these, it tells us there's a couple things wrong. One, if I hover over it, it says that there's one other overload. One, it says the string to convert. Okay, now we have an out value. This is one of the options we have, an out value, which is the result, right? And it says converts the string representation of a number to its 32-bit signed integer equivalent. A return value indicates whether the conversion succeeded, right? So did it succeed? And if it succeeded, right, as an example, that's fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing. If it didn't succeed, right, then what happens? This value is going to be false, right? That's what it's going to return. This is one option. What are the other options? Let me just kind of go in here and kind of try this out. So that's one signature. The other signature is this one, where you have, again, it returns a Boolean, right? And what we're going to say is, here's the string to convert, and then we're going to use system.globalization number styles. It's a whole other thing to reformat everything so it comes out. Notice that there's even in the other string, there is an out parameter, right? And it's an integer result, whatever the integer result is, right? So the out parameter is something that we can use, right, to kind of determine. So this format that I have here is wrong, right? Nice idea, Tom. But what we want to do is we want to use the opacity scroll bar.value as the out parameter. Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about here. So I've done it this way, but I can actually write it like this. Try parse, right? And we're going to talk about the opacity, opacity text box. Opacity text box.text. That's the string we're going to parse. And then the out result, which is the opacity scroll bar, right? Dot value. That's the out result, right? Now here's the thing. You have to put the keyword out, if I'm not wrong. That's the one thing that has to, because it's basically saying that I want you to have this. Now, if you hover over this, it's going to say a property of or indexer may not be passed as an out or reference parameter. So which means that I'm going to have another value that's going to hold the out property, which is just a value like an integer, as an example. And I'm going to take that value and assign it to my value, to my value itself. So example would be something like some kind of integer result. So I'll call it result. Right, which I initialize as 0, and I can take the result here and kind of pump out whatever the result is of my text, right, into an integer, right? So this goes into this result when I do this, just like this, right? So it looks at the text file and returns the result into the result field, right? That's what it does. But here, what I can do, because try parse returns, I can kind of say something like this: if try parse da 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 is equal to true. Right? If it's true, that automatically does the result, actually. It says if it's true, great. If not, and we want it to be true, which means if it's not true is what we really want to test for. So if I say if it's not true, then give an error, like something like message box dot show, please enter a valid value, or something like a correct value, which with the string text as an example as error, input error or something like that. And you can go further with a text box that shows message box buttons and all that kind of stuff. Okay, cancel. Okay. So try parse is actually quite an interesting construct, because it does two things. It tries to convert this into an integer, and we can return the result of what it converts into another variable, right? And this variable later on, right? So if I wanted to do it, instead of not equal to, I could say equals to this. It's true. Then I can say, well, in that case, if it's true, do this. Else, if it's false, do this. And if it's true, I can say something like my opacity. I want to change my opacity scroll bar dot value, right, to equal to result. Again, it's a different way of doing things, right? But equally good. Make sense? Different kind of construct. Same kind of idea. Let's test this out and see if it's true. If I put an A or something like that. So I put A, and then it says, please enter a valid value right away, right? So it does it right in line, right? Now here's what I want to do. If I enter an A, I want to highlight, this is my next little thing, I want to highlight the A, right? And I want to kind of reset it to a 0 or something like that, not an A, because A doesn't make any sense. Okay, so that's the next step. So else, message box.show, And I also want to set the text box, so opacity text box dot text. I want to set that back to 0, which I want to do. And I also want to set the opacity text box, to select all, right? That's what I want to do. So I want to use the select all method to select the entire text box, so that way, if it's wrong, it'll just select everything, so it doesn't allow me to change it right away. An example of this would be like this, right? We've done this a couple of times, so I'll review. So again, it's selected, and I've put in a value of A. It says it's invalid, bam, it puts it back to 0 and highlights it. So it doesn't allow me to put that value in again. Even if I put something else in, if I try and type another character, like for example, 0 and something else, it'll still turn it back to 0. Okay? And the same thing goes, like what you said, if I kind of return it, it's going to say, no, you can't put a value less than 0. Now that we may want to try and limit. We can try and limit the backspace. Yeah. 08? 08? 085? 0850. That's a problem, right? That's another issue, right? It converts it, but the value, right? This is where we have to struggle with that part too. What if the entry value, the result, this is the great idea. We have control over the result, right? And if the result is not within the minimum or maximum value, whatever we decide to put in, then again, send them back and re-highlight saying it has to be a value between 0 and whatever the value is. Of course, but that's the idea. The idea for us is to stop it from breaking, right? So before we do this, we have to test it. We say, well, if result, is greater than or greater than or equal to 0, right? We know that. And that's the first test, right? What else is the other test? And our result is less than 256, right? As an example, if we want it less than that value, then we can do the opacity thing, right? Uh-oh, we're gonna have a problem, right? So we want to do this. But what if it's not true? What if this result fails? Then what? We want to do this again, right? Please enter a valid value or some kind of error. We can put an error inside here if we really want to, like a nested error, right? I hate doing this though, because we're duplicating, right? So I'm going to copy the message box. Is this what I should do? Just putting it out there, right? And then instead of please enter a valid value, input error, looks the same. I could say enter a value between, a more specific message, please enter a value between 0 and 255. I could do this, right? Just putting it out there, right? And I could say, still an input error, but it's a different kind. And then we can do all this stuff, set it to 0, and then opacity text box text select all. These two things are the same. So we're duplicating a little bit of stuff. Right? This is one way we could approach it. But only if this fails, this check. So both these conditions have to be true. Sometimes what I like to do is encircle these two conditions inside brackets, parentheses like this for clarity. I like to do this a lot, right? This is my old programming, habit from when I was learning C, right? Was that? No, we got the at the time when I was learning programming, we had the professor had a ruler and he would smack us on the hand if we did something like this, right?
Is there electricity back then?
Electricity? Well, no, it didn't hardly existed, only to power the computer, right? Anyway, let's try this out now and see what happens, right? So again, if I want to do something like 2,500, right? It's going to say it's invalid. It's 0 to 255. Put us back. Resurface this one, so it won't break it, right? And if I go to something like less than 0, so -1, also any kind of symbol that goes negative will also give me that symbol. Now here we still have an issue. Why, oh why, does it only allow me to go to 246? Like, well, that's because the minimum value is 1, right? That's the small change. Oh, I mean from here, and if I go here.
Yeah, but if you drop it, what do you do? Drop it anyway.
followed by 10. That's what it's supposed to do. Well, anyways, the point is that if you drop it, you're saying it drops to something else. Well, the idea is that you're supposed to, you can also control it like this, right? That's the other way you can control it, those two ways. That's typical. But why doesn't allow me to go to 255? Could be. I can't go this way. But if that's true, then that's weird. Shouldn't I have been able to have a smaller scroll bar? Let's try it out. Let's see what you're right. If I make my scroll bar ultra short, it's a short man's world. Hold on a second. Let's make this a short scroll bar, right? Does that mean my values are going to be less? That doesn't make any sense, right? Let's try this out. See if you're right. Right? So I made my scroll bar shorter, and then hopefully when my VM spins up again, we'll be okay. So if I kind of go all the way to this side, then it's 246. Yeah. No, it's the same, right? Yeah. $285. $285. Yeah. 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 Why is that? Google it. Say scroll bar, horizontal scroll bar, can never get 255 or my value. How about if it was another value? What if it was, instead of 0 to 255, it was something else? Okay, example would be my opacity is 1 to 100. 100% opacity. You can also look at it that way too, right? Instead of a hexadecimal value, right, it's 1 to 100, right? So how would that change everything? And then I will move on from the scroll bar because you can see obviously there's a value here. Here's the real value. If I'm really trying the opacity before I accept my change, shouldn't I give an example of what the opacity would look like? That's probably a good thing to do. That's probably a better effect than just seeing the number. So one thing is I want to go and put in the properties. So here's my value for opacity. And I want to change this back, instead of 100 to 255, let's go back to 100. And we'll go to the large change is 10, that's fine. And the minimum, instead of 0, it's going to be 1. There it is. So 1, 0. So this is nice, right? Save that. And now we should probably change our code because now the result, it has to be less than 101, right? Greater than 0. Be saying so 1 to 101. And my messages obviously should be different too, 1 to 100. And now I want to change the physical opacity of my form, right? So when I change the opacity, I change the opacity physically. When I'm changing it, it changed it. And that's usually done not here necessarily, but here. So whenever I change one of these two things, I'm going to call a common function, like change opacity, something like that, right? Which I don't have. So let's make that function really quickly, right? So again, I want to make a function which is private. I'm going to call, which returns void, and it says we're going to call it change opacity, right? And my function, what it's going to do is going to change the opacity of the form, right? So we'll say this dot, and if I have an opacity value, here's my opacity object itself, right? So I'm changing the value of my opacity, and I'm going to make it equal to, at any point, to the value that I'm going to send in to the form, which is a value. So this is my opacity, right? I'm putting in lowercase. Like maybe I want to call it, just to be nice, I'll call it new opacity, right? So I'll call this new opacity. This is the local variable that I'm using for this, right? So I pass an opacity value and it changed it. And I want to do it, and it's a very small change. I could also do it inline if I really want to by just putting it in here, but there's a reason for this. And there's the same thing, the same reason that I don't want to like doing this. It's duplication, right? So I want to do it in two places. I want to do it here. So when my opacity changes, my scroll bar, I want to change the opacity to what the value is. So I want to say something like, so change opacity. And I want to put in the value. So it's opacity, scroll bar, value, whatever the value is. I want to change it when it changes. So that's one change I can make with the opacity. And I also want to do the same thing when I physically change the result, whatever this is. If it's the right number, I want to change it after I get the result. And of course, I don't want to make it the value because that's kind of an overkill. I want to change this to results, right? Because that would be the right thing to do. So now it actually is going to change my opacity. Let's see if that works. So So I run here, and if I change it, now you can see that it goes from, oh man, what happened? How come my form not changing at all? And it goes to 90, but I can't get to 100, right? I don't understand why. Can't get to 100. Well, at least it doesn't show 100, right? It doesn't show 100. What should I do? To 1, right? Because then this, if I did this, I can go down for a large amount. But that means when I change this later on, if I change the large change property of this, it'll go. But well, how come my opacity didn't change? Because my form opacity should change, right? So let's take a look at that. So if I go to my form itself, and I click on the form, and I look at opacity, my opacity is 100%. 100%. And I want to change my opacity to something like, when I dial it up, I want to change to 30%, right? Or whatever it's going to be. I'm just going to give you the example. So now it should be semi-transparent, right? Like this.
Shouldn't you be starting at 100 and going down?
Very good. I like that. So I wouldn't see the form, so how am I going to see what I'm doing, right? But sometimes you want to change that, and maybe you want to accept. You might have some item that has, you know, accept, or maybe some kind of change over on the side, some kind of preview feature, whatever it's going to be, right? And then you press escape, and then in the escape button itself, we press escape, escapes your changes, cancels your changes, right? You can probably do some kind of functionality like that. But I agree with you. I think it shouldn't be, at the beginning, it shouldn't be 0, it should be 100, right? Okay. So I want to do that. I want to make it 100. So let's put it back to what it was. So I'm going to go, the value for my opacity text box then should start off at 100, right? That's my text. And this item, the value, right, instead of starting off at 1, should also start off at 100, right? Because that's the default changes. I'm going to do what you said, you know, and change the small change to 1, but the large change, I'm going to change that to 1 as well. Okay, and now let's see what I get. So, well, and I've dialed down the opacity, but I got no change. Still does everything good. I can go from, you know, 100 to 1. I can do that now, right, because of my large change, right? But the opacity, she no changing, right? Well, how come it's not working? Well, here's my opacity change. I'm saying the opacity is the new opacity, whatever it is. I'm making an integer. This is a returns, oh man. Oh, it's a get set. Gets or set the opacity level of the form, right? And I'm setting it to the new opacity, but it's expecting a double, right? And I'm setting it an integer. Now I got to do another change. This is what I want to do is here. Oh no, it can convert an integer to a double. I'll just chop everything down to nothing, right? It'll make it exactly what it's supposed to be. So let's try a hard-coded value. Let's make it a value of, you know, 30. It's double, right? 30.0. Can I do that with a double without any kind of F or D or whatever? So if I did this and I say, no matter what they change, it changed to 30%, right? Let's see if that works. So we have to try a hard-coded value first. So if I change it, it changed to 30%. Nothing happened. It's the right thing. I mean, I changed the opacity. I changed it here. Oh, not an F top. 30, right? It doesn't change anything. My form didn't change, right? So this is incorrect. Could it be that it means that it's some kind of percent, like 0.3? That's the case. That's a whole other thing we have to do, right? So I'm saying, you know, what is that? Does that make sense? Yeah, right? So it's not a number from 1 to 100. It's from 0 to 1, right? And if that's the case, when we get our new opacity from 1 to 100, we need to divide it by 100, right? And so that way we get an integer. We're going to divide it by 100, and it should give us what we want. Let's try this out. Or should it? No new opacity, right? And we want to divide it by 100. Is this going to give us what we want? Right? Is this going to give us the right value? Again, this is kind of conversion 101. Anybody? Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Let me try this. You can see that I can do this now, right? What if I press escape? Will it do anything? No. And now, if I do this and I kind of click somewhere over here, that's not going to do it. But here on the form, so here I'm on the form, I can't see anything. I got to make a fail-safe, so that way, worst case, if I don't like my changes, I can escape.
Wouldn't you be just as easy just to stop at 5%?
I could, but what if the guy wants a 0%?
Yeah, but then you want it to be
He
invisible.
wants it. See, he wants it invisible, this control, whatever control he's monitoring, right? So that's fine, but a fail-safe, we should say, if you don't like that, escape, right? So how could I use a button like escape, the escape key, to stop and change it back to 0, change it back to 100% or whatever, or escape the changes? Well, there's a couple ways I can do that. One, I could add a couple buttons, right? So I can add a couple buttons, 2 buttons. Here's my first button. And I could say, you know, whatever it is, accept, right? So this will be the accept button. And then we'll stop this little craziness. And we'll call it accept. Making an opacity form, right? We can use. And we'll make it a little larger, and we'll increase, make it a large man's world again, right? Just because. I'll make the opacity change here as a change. Who knows? Put this button over here on the side. Make it a little, shrink it down a little bit, so it kind of fits. Copy paste. Put this over here so it's exactly the same size, so it's not a different size. And we'll call this cancel button. To make our own little custom opacity form, right? Cancel. Oh. Hey, cool. So the accept button, right, on the form itself, notice that we have a couple of additional things here, right? There's the accept button, right, on the form. We can say the accept button is accept button. The cancel button, right? This cancel button here itself is the cancel button, the one that causes it to stop, right? So what is there a form control that does the same thing? The cancel button. Well, there it is. So cancel button and accept button. If I press the cancel button, cancels the form itself, whatever I was going to do, right? But I want to do it with a key. So when I press a key, right, I'm listening for a keystroke, right, anywhere on the form. Anytime I press escape, right? Is that true, or am I really listening for the keystroke here, right, or here? What could I do to make that work? So cancel, escape. So if I run it the way it is, and if I press cancel, I'm actually stopping the operation of the form. The form is being, all the changes, you're right, it's not being accepted. Nothing's happening. It's actually the negative. It's a negative button, right? So if I click the cancel button, what I wanted to do is go back to 100%, okay? But also when I press the escape key, I want to do the same thing, okay? Click the accept button, whatever it is done. It's 100%. Right, or you know, 30% or whatever it's going to be. I could. So if I press enter, right, my enter would be accept, and my escape would be cancel, right? That's what I want to do: escape and accept. All right. So how would I change that? Anybody have an idea? A clue about what to do? First of all, I'd have to have some functionality for my cancel and accept. One is, my cancel would stop the opacity change and close the form. That's what it would do. Accept would close the form and accept the opacity change of whatever control that's calling it, right? But what I want to press my escape button, right? So how do I press a button, like a key? I'm listening for a key, right? And when something's happening, a keystroke, right? Well, let's take a look at the form itself. So in the form, anytime I press escape in the form, it's inside this event handling, right? Because that's what I want to do. So I want to kind of listen for this keystroke, right? So look at, there is a key press, a key down, and a key up, right? So if I do a key press event, right, for the form, not for the buttons or anything else, anytime I press escape, anytime, ever, on the form, right? That's one thing. But would I have to do that for the opacity changes as well, like for the text as well as for this? Because I went down to 0 and I want to escape. I want to do something, right? First, let's do it for this key press here. So I want to say, if I key press, and there's two different, key down and key press. What's the difference, guys? What's the difference between key down and key press? Huh? Is it? No. Incorrect. What would I do? Key up and key down. Yes. Release the key. Key down is when I, and key press is what? Held, right? So if I want to hold the button down, that's a different event than if I want to just press the button one time. Holding the button down will be if I want to, for example, I'm playing a game and I'm using the WASD, WASD controls, and I press the W key to continue moving forward. That will be a key press, right? Key down is if I just want to click Control to fire or something like that every single time. If I hold the button down though, if I don't have a key press, as an example, then it would only fire once, even if I held it down. Okay, so I want to do a key down event for the form, right? So here's my opacity for key down event, and I'm listing for a specific key. So depending on what the key is, right? How do I know what the event of the key is that I'm getting? Well, it's in the sender, right? The event itself. So if I go E dot, right, and the key value, I can go the key value, the key code. Which one would you think I should use? Key value, right? If my key value, right, I go compare to, I can do that. If I go key code, type both for a second. Here's my key code. If I go dot compare to, either one, key code or key value. So if I go key value is equal to what? Is there some kind of, key event? Some kind of default, enumeration for the keys, right? Is there? Example, the escape key is what I really want. And that would be here, right? Could I do that? My key value is key escape. How come it's giving me an error? It says, oh man, it says gets the keyboard value for a key down or key up event. Property or indexer key event arg's key value cannot be assigned to, it is read only. So I can say if my key value is equal to this, right? So if E.key value is equal to E.escape, then something else. That's what I want to do, right? And operator equals cannot be applied to operands of type int and keys, right? So why would that be? Because this, if I look at this thing here, it's integer type. This is an enumeration type, escape value. But if I did something like key code, right, does that work? And that's the answer, right? So if my key code is equal to the escape key, then what do I want to do? Anytime I press on the form itself, I want to press escape, I want to change my opacity, right, to 100%, right? I want to change my text that's the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to say something like my opacity text. I'm really going to really different thing here. The rails. That text is equal to 100, right? That's what I want. If I press the form itself, and it can't be 100, it's got to be 100. But which will generate also the event, right? Because when my text gets changed, which it would, it'll generate the event and convert the scroll bar as well, right? Let's try this out, and then we'll think about what else breaks this thing. All right, so I change it here, and I press escape. Does it work? Oh man, how come it escaped? What if I press the form and escape? Oh man, what the hell? I can do this, I can do this. When I press the escape key, and she ain't working. What else could be it? What else could be the way? Did I do something wrong when I did this keys dot escape? Is that the wrong thing to do? Key code? Because it says here, key code gets the keyboard code for a control key down or control key up event. But I'm getting, it says here, it says the keys specifies key codes and modifiers. My escape key. Hey, let's make another key. Instead of the escape key, let's do something that's more relevant. Let's call it, we'll use the, I don't know. Sure, C. Okay, we'll use the C key, this one. So capital C. And by the way, is there a difference between capital C and lowercase c? And the answer is no, because you have to use a modifier for that. Okay, so let's save that and see. So I press the C key. It's not an escape key. Press the C key. It doesn't work there. Press it over here. It kind of has focus on this thing, and I can't do it. In fact, every time, the idea is nice, Tom, but even if I try and dial this back, because of my code, it gives focus into this file, which is good for us, right? That's good. That means we don't have to worry about the form. We'll do the same exact thing, but on the actual opacity text box itself. That's the solution. So nice idea, right? But I want to do this opacity form thing on the text box. Okay, let's try this out. It crashed on something else, I know. So let's try this out. So opacity form. So again, we'll do the key down event, right? So here's a key down. And we'll just copy this stuff from here to here. And I want to kill this one in a second, but I want to just definitely change this back to what I wanted, which is escape. Right? So I want that part to go to 100, right? And I want to get rid of the other one, so I'm going to go click on the form itself and look at the key down event and get rid of it this way, because I don't want to, if I delete it, it'll mess up my form. Right now, I'll run it again. And if I change it to something like this and press escape, it goes back to 100, right? So whether I do it here or if I choose something else, right, it's still going to go to, now this goes to 0. That's bad. We have to change that because we messed that up. So cancel. Sorry, exit. Go to here. And what we want to do is when we, instead of doing this to 0, that would be bad. We want to make it go to 100. So the default is 100, not 0. And let's try that out. So I go goes back to 100. If I dial it down, it goes to whatever it's going to be. If it's really too low and I press escape, it goes back to 100.
What if you press the cancel button?
Nothing yet. Well, we can make the cancel button so it
Can you
cancels
slide down a little bit? Because I thought that it would come back to 100.
this.
But not all the way. You can't see it then. But, yeah, that's fine.
This doesn't do anything yet. We can make it do something. We haven't done it yet.
It looked like it went to 100 though.
No. If I want to, if I press the cancel button, we can make it to 100 with the same thing, right? Okay, is that enough for the scroll bar? I think so, right? You guys can infer the rest. So great control for things like values. You want to scroll up, and especially when you want to limit the user, to certain values, as opposed to let them type in whatever they want. Why is this good? And it can work in your favor if you're going to make something like some kind of input control, right? Especially if you want to dial up a certain amount of values, right? That makes sense. Where does it fail? A decimal value. Okay, let's try that out. So we'll stop it, or we'll go back in here, and we'll go back to this, and we'll go cancel. Sorry, cancel. And the reason why is because we clicked away and we clicked back, right? Because now this thing doesn't have any thing anymore. There we go. Doesn't have any focus anymore. So when we clicked away and clicked back, it gave focus to the form, not to the control, and we can change that. When we activate the form again, it gives focus back to that control to stop the problem. Phew. But let's say you're right. Maybe we'll put in some other value, like 100 point. Didn't work for me. Okay, so that didn't fail. How about if I put in a, no value, right? Or I put 0 dot, I can't put that value in. What do you mean? Decimal. So decimal, decimal, decimal. Won't allow me to do that. So, maybe. Okay.
The first line.
Any other questions around the scroll bar? Okay, so a useful control. Spent a lot of time on that, which I didn't expect to do on number 5, right? Yeah, we're not going to do that. But it tells you the small change property in a lot of detail, and it talks about how to do all this stuff and the scroll bar events. I'm going to stop there for today. Just talk about the scroll bar. We're not going to talk about drag and drop because I want to get right to working with you guys on the other stuff, which is I think where we have to go. And next week we'll try and do some more things and maybe some less variations. Okay. Questions around the scroll bar? I think it's a very useful control, especially if you're doing something like settings. That's another thing you can use it for. Any kind of settings, and you can also customize the scroll bar to make it look different by using different values, as opposed to accept the way the scroll bar looks by default. And that's it for today. And we'll stop recording.